Is C2 Furina required for your account? Do you need Bennett in almost every team in the game? If you're not playing Fischl and Aggravate, are you a loser dumbass griefer? Is playing the meta the absolute most important thing you need to do in order to be a successful Genshin Impact player? No. So does that mean the meta is completely worthless and you should just play whoever you want, however you want, come what may? Well, no. You shouldn't do that either. Understanding the hidden mechanics used by the meta characters and what makes them strong, I think, is the key to all of this. Hello everyone, welcome back. For those who have been on this channel long enough, you will know that I have cleared a lot of quote-unquote endgame content like Spiral Abyss, Theater, Stygian Onslaught with characters and teams that aren't necessarily meta. Triple Dendro Nialu against Tulpa when the meta was a Vape team, various Aloy team comps even now, Lisa as a DPS. And I think what helps the most with making these teams work against endgame content is understanding things like ICD reactions and also sorting out a team rotation that is both smooth and also gets whatever buffs onto everyone that wants them. Because playing the meta teams is optional, but understanding how they work can make any character viable. There is one great big misconception about the meta that has annoyed me, and that is forcing people to play meta characters that they don't like. That's the emotional manipulation that comes from using the word need. You need Fischl and Aggravate teams because her A4 passive is very strong. You need Bennett in every attack scaling team because his buff is very strong. You just have to play Hu Tao or Nouvelette. Whoop, 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 whoop. Doesn't matter who you want to play, just use those characters. Thankfully, we haven't seen that particular sentiment lately, so there we go. There was this post on the subreddit like years ago that I occasionally remember as probably the pinnacle example of this misconception. There was a new player who had been trying out the game, they've tried out a bunch of new characters, and they decided that they didn't like some of them, notably including Bennett. Now, they were asking for some recommendations on who they should try out next and what kind of teams they should start building, and somehow the top upvoted comment was essentially, just use Bennett. You need to use Bennett. He's the only on field for a few seconds, and he's really good, trust. Just use Bennett. He already marked that he didn't like Bennett. I wonder if that's when I started having a problem with the Bennett Defence Brigade. The meta is actually just how the game can be played at an optimal level. That means so long as you understand it, you can still be very creative about it. And if you put enough effort into it, even bad characters can still pop off big time. Case in point, Amber Maids, the most terrifying people on the planet. So let's go through some of the mechanics that I think not only make combat in the game a lot more fun to play, but also can make your characters and your team perform even better. Let's start off with ICD, internal cooldown. When a character does elemental damage, that damage tends to apply an element, but not necessarily every time. There is a standard ICD for reactions. It's every 3 hits and every 2.5 seconds. What that means is starting from your first elemental hit, after 2 hits, the next one will apply an element. On top of that, the next one after 2.5 seconds will also apply an element. This is how we get something like Malwika's back-to-back application when she is donutting on her bike. Some characters also have special ICDs or even no ICD, for example Miko's ult. This is what makes timing your elemental application really important, because that brings us to elemental gauge theory. When a target without an elemental aura gets an element applied to them, the strength of that aura will depend on how many units of element were applied to them. When another element is applied to that aura, the reaction occurring may result in different auras based on the strength, usually on a 1-to-1 unit ratio, by consuming some of those aura units. On top of that, some reactions have different multipliers on how much of the aura is removed. For example, 1 unit of pyro on a hydro aura, also known as reverse vape, only consumes half a unit of hydro, so it's only a half multiplier. Whereas 1 unit of hydro on a pyro aura, i.e. forward vape, consumes 2 units of pyro, i.e. a 2x multiplier. This is why it's easier to maintain a hydro aura on a target and vape with Arlecchino than it is to maintain a pyro aura on a target and vape with Nouvelette. But not impossible. Then there's some auras that have elements coexisting like Electro, Lunar Charged, and Quick and Aggravate. And there's also a couple of other mechanics involved like aura decay, aura attacks. You could definitely look into them if you want, but I don't really feel like they've been that much of a game changer in my experience. Buff types as well are very important because there's abilities that can snapshot and then there's abilities that are dynamic. Most abilities are dynamic, and their damage over the course of their duration can change depending on whether or not they receive or lose buffs over time. Snapshottable abilities don't gain or lose any buffs after they have been activated, case in point, Oz, Pyronado, Lisa's Lantern. For the most part, Hoyo have really been making abilities that don't snapshot buffs. Last character I think that actually had a snapshottable buff was probably the highest off-field skill damage. There was also Linny, but he's an on-fielder, so I don't think that really matters. This can make some characters surprisingly a lot better with certain buffers than you'd think. For example, Fischl and Xiangling and Lisa aren't particularly great at moving around all that much, but because their abilities can snapshot, their off-field damage at the very least is still perfect with someone like Iansan as their buffer. And finally, one other thing I want to touch on is buff stacking and how it affects builds. This is more of a math thing than a mechanics thing, but it is something that is important because if you understand it, it can affect how you will farm artifacts to make your characters stronger so that they feel better to play and thus clear content. Essentially, TLDR, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Just because the character is an attack scaler doesn't mean you want oops all attack. If they are in a reaction team, like with a Vape or Aggravate, etc., EM can still be just as useful. On top of that, crit, i.e. crit rate and damage, can also be a very strong stat because that's something that a lot of people put actually quite a lot of premium into, unless of course you're a Kokomi main. Looking at what buffs your team is giving you can also greatly affect what artifacts you use. We're now starting to see some characters with teams that aren't able to just provide us with every single kind of buff to the character. There are teams that end up being quite restrictive of some buffs. For example, Skirk teams typically don't involve an attack buffer like a Yansan or Sara, so building more attack on her is actually a good idea. Any team with Furina tends to already have a lot of damage percent buffs already from Furina, and so therefore you may find yourself using a cup that isn't a damage percent cup instead, and you end up doing a bit more damage. Some characters' constellations can also give a lot of crit, like Shilina's C2 for cryo characters, so at that point we find ourselves in the hilarious situation where building an attack hat might not actually be such a bad idea for someone like Aloy. I've occasionally hopped on some viewer accounts to help them clear Spiral Abyss with their characters, and from my experience, it seems like their artifact qualities weren't as good as what I have, and so even if I use the meta characters, quote-unquote, that I personally don't play that much, like Bennett, Fischl, Sitlali, I still couldn't clear the Abyss on their accounts. From that, I think we can conclude that build quality is also going to be just as greatly important of a factor in how well your teams work, not just whether or not the characters are meta. And so by knowing this stuff, it means that you can play team comps with the characters that you like, because at the end of the day, synergy is probably the most important part about team building. Now, I just want to point out an example of a team that can use these mechanics and is seemingly a perfectly viable option, in my experience, that is also quite strong. Aggravate Sethos with Beidou. There's a few things that make this team pretty interesting to play. Beidou's ult applies 4 units of Electro, Nahida's skill only applies 1 unit of Dendro to form a Quicken Aura, so there's still some of Beidou's Electro left, which means if you bring along someone like Shilinen, Sucrose, Kaz, they can react with that Electro and apply various buffs for the Electro characters like Res Red and Damage Percent, meaning Sethos, or whoever your Electro on-fielder is, can start doing a lot more damage thanks to those buffs working for them. And by charge attacking with Sethos, for example, this attack doesn't actually have an ICD, which means every single one of your charge attacks will be hitting that Quicken Aura with Electro reactions, thus you'll be aggravating every single time. But what's also interesting is that I found that if it's Nahida into Beidou instead of Beidou into Nahida, there's no underlying Electro Aura for some reason. I don't really know why. So there may be second rotation memes. That's an entirely separate conversation right there. By having a better understanding of these mechanics, you can play teams featuring whoever you want. Pick the characters who appeal to you the most, and then build a team around them. The meta options are usually a pretty good place to start. But if there is a character that you don't like, and then try and find a suitable alternative to them. For example, if you don't like Fischl, try and play with Miko. If you don't like Bennett, try and play with Sara Iansan, etc, etc. Above all else, do try to enjoy yourself when playing a video game. It's not like you're getting paid to do this. or maybe you are, in which case have fun slaving away using default outfit Bennett. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. Who's the character that you love to play, but people keep saying is bad, and yet in your hands, you've been able to make them work really, really well? Don't forget to subscribe for more Genshin Impact action, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Power that ended. Absurd.
Give some space.
Illusions are but distractions.
Be moved.
Shattered. Bring it. Let the mountain's veins boil.
Let's play turn a little. Make yourself a home.
Way ahead of you.
Only emptiness away.